Hey guys, tonight we time travel back to 1877 Japan, where thousands of heavily armed traditionalists decide that modernization is a personal insult and the only solution is armed cosplay at national scale. Picture this, you're in full samurai armor, lacquered, layered, and extremely chafing, charging a Gatling gun defended by dudes in Prussian uniforms. It's not going well. The bushes are on fire. There's a guy to your left screaming bonsai, and to your right, someone is composing a death haiku mid-sprint. You probably aren't surviving this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Post your location and local time in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The year is 1877, but your soul's stuck somewhere in 1600. You're a samurai, sort of. Technically, the Meiji government says you're now a civilian, which is like calling a shark a wet fish. They've banned your sword in public. They've replaced your rice stipend with a pay cut and mandatory retirement. And the worst part, you can't even behead someone for looking at you sideways anymore. Rude. You're from Satsuma Domain, the spicy southern tip of Japan. Your people are proud. You punched the Tokugawa shogunate in the teeth just a few years ago and helped restore the emperor. But now, that same emperor has surrounded himself with soft-handed ministers who write policy memos and wear Western shoes. You see a man in a necktie and instinctively reach for your katana. One historical fact here, the Meiji Restoration officially began in 1868, but by 1877, the samurai class had been completely gutted of its privileges. No swords, no stipends, no social status, just sadness and paperwork. And who's to blame for all this? According to your emotionally constipated worldview, Tokyo. Specifically, the Meiji bureaucrats who want to turn Japan into France, but with fewer guillotines and more steam engines. You stare at your reflection in the blade. You practice EAI cuts in the rice fields while grumbling about honor and the good old days and how kids don't duel anymore. Your cousin joins you. He's traded in his hakama for suspenders. His job telegraph inspector, he says, it's the future. You say, the future can bite me. One weird trivia nugget during this exact period. Many ex-samurai refused to use paper money because they believed it was dishonorable to trade rice for printed lies. So yes, you are broke on purpose. Now, in most places, when a ruling class loses its privileges, they either write angry blog posts or join LinkedIn. But you daydream about cavalry charges and whisper battle chants into your miso soup. You build shrines to Saigo Takamori, your spiritual dad and real-life badass. And the thing is, he agrees with you, at least partially. Saigo's like if George Washington and a depressed golden retriever had a baby. He fought to restore the emperor, then quit politics when things got too bureaucratic and corrupt. Now he lives in Satsuma too, growing sweet potatoes, mentoring kids, and probably lifting rocks for emotional release. Historians still argue whether Saigo actually wanted a war or just wanted to scare Tokyo into fixing itself. Some say he was manipulated by his followers. Others think he planned rebellion all along. Honestly, he could have just been really tired. Either way, you're part of a simmering volcano now. You and thousands of other ex-samurai mutter the same 3 words over sake every night. This ain't over. There's tension in the air, and not just because of the pollen. You hear rumors. Armories are being looted. Students from Saigo's academy are training like it's the prequel to something tragic. Then one morning, the government sends a ship to investigate. And you think, oh, it's about to get stupid. It does. The Meiji ship docks to check out the Satsuma Military Academy, and the locals promptly fire on it. Smooth move. That's like flipping off a police drone and then asking why it's still filming. Tokyo panics. Why is Satsuma acting like Florida? Someone probably asks. Troops are deployed. Telegraphs are buzzing. You can smell rebellion like overcooked eel. But you're thrilled. Finally, you're calligraphy practicing. Sake slamming samurai soul has a purpose again. You unsheath your sword, do a few warm-up swings, accidentally decapitate a scarecrow and say, "It's time." Just then, your younger brother walks in wearing a Western military jacket and holding a copy of The Art of War. You glare at him. He sighs. "This is going to be messy, isn't it?" You nod. "Messy," you whisper, "and glorious. And probably fatal. The Meiji men and their fancy pants. You didn't choose to be born into a feudal class of sword-wielding proto-dads with strict opinions on honor, rice, and haircuts, but here you are. And now, here come the Meiji men strutting through your history like they own the scroll. You spot one now, striding down a dusty Satsuma road in a bowler hat, tweed jacket, and glasses that scream, "I passed a civil service exam and I'm better than you." He has a cane, but not the kind you fight with, more like a walking stick for smugness. He's reading a government decree aloud from a scroll that smells like Tokyo ink and bad intentions. Effective immediately, samurai stipends are abolished. All military affairs will henceforth be administered by the National Army. Samurai may not carry swords in public. You stop listening after abolished. You grip your katana so hard it squeaks. You didn't survive years of Bushido drills and icy mountain duels to be told you're now unemployed with attitude. Let's pause for a verified historical fact. The Haidare Edict of 1876 formally banned the wearing of swords in public. That's right. One government memo made centuries of samurai culture illegal overnight. It was like banning baguettes in Paris or outlawing Texas accents. Your clan gathers in the sake house, an angry, grumbling circle of has-beens and never-weres. You raise your cup. They want us disarmed. Let them come take it. Someone growls, probably the guy missing 3 fingers. You slam your drink. They took our land, our honor, and our sideburns. What next? Public schooling. Someone mutters darkly. Everyone gasps. Here's the weird trivia nugget. Some samurai revolted not just over swords or money, but because of mandatory haircut laws. That's right. Cutting off your top knot wasn't just a fashion shift. It was psychological warfare. You weren't just modernized. You were humiliated. Back in Tokyo, the Meiji government is doing yoga poses of self-congratulation. They've hired foreign advisors, built train tracks, and created ministries for everything from finance to goat census. They're transforming Japan from feudal soup into industrial curry. And to their credit, things are booming. The yen is in, the shogunate is out, telegraph lines crisscross the country. But there's one problem. You, the angry swordsman writing hate poetry in cursive while planning how to overthrow a railroad. The government sees it too. They know Satsuma is boiling. That's why they cut off the stipend system, the last thing keeping ex-samurai economically pacified. They want you to become farmers, clerks, teachers, maybe open a soba stall, reinvent yourself. You consider it briefly. Then you remember what reinvention means to you. Dishonor, awkward paperwork, and smiling at people you should be dueling. Your friend Tetsunosuke tries modernity. He joins the National Army. Within weeks, he's wearing stiff boots, eating canned beef, and taking orders from a 22-year-old with a foreign mustache. "I miss the rice stipend," he whispers one night, crying into a handkerchief made of regret. You pat him on the back. Come home before they make you use a fork. Historians still argue whether the Meiji modernization was truly for the people or just an elite panic button. The reforms were fast, sometimes brilliant, sometimes bulldozery. The commoners got education, but also taxes. The samurai got unemployment. The emperor got a very shiny throne. And the bureaucracy. Oh, the bureaucracy is thriving. You get a letter in the mail, a thing now. Thanks to the Meiji postal system, it's from the capital. It says you owe back taxes. Also, you've been conscripted. Also, your sword must be registered. You respond by yelling at the postman and writing an 800-line war poem about revenge and fire and boats. No one reads it. Instead, you sign up for something useful sword drills in the dark with other lunatics. Your clan's elder convenes a secret meeting. He draws a map of Kyushu with dramatic hand flourishes. We march, he declares, and remind the emperor who restored his throne in the first place. Someone coughs. We don't hate the emperor, right? Correct. The elder nods. Just the 57 people advising him. Another adds, and their shoes, their stupid shiny shoes. You all nod. The Meiji men must pay for the stipends, for the haircut laws, for the synthetic socks. Your training intensifies. You run barefoot through forests. You practice with bamboo spears. You scream battle chants into the wind. A fox watches you from the bushes and probably thinks, idiots. And you don't care because you're ready. Or so you think. Because one night, while watching a demonstration of a modern rifle, your buddy accidentally shoots a hole through your teacup from 70 yards away. You stare at the shattered porcelain. He lowers the gun, laughing. Pretty cool, right? You nod slowly. We're doomed. Saigo, the sad dad with a sword. You wake up one morning to the sound of chickens screaming, which either means it's breakfast or Saigo Takamori is nearby. Turns out it's both. He's in the village square again, sleeves rolled up, feeding dogs, waving to farmers, probably writing haikus in his head. The man glows like a tragic lighthouse quiet, honorable, and permanently shaped like someone carrying the weight of a dying era. To you and the other samurai, he's not just a former general, he's the guy. The grandmaster of melancholy Bushido, the moral compass pointing south with a sword in its teeth. You watch as some kid from the academy bows so low his forehead probably cracks the dirt. Saigo-sama, should we rise against the Meiji traitors? Saigo sighs. He's been sighing a lot lately. You think he might be 40% sigh by volume? He says, I just wanted to retire and raise dogs. Fun historical fact. Saigo Takamori really did retire from politics and spend his last years training dogs, hunting, and running a private military academy for samurai youth because that's totally a normal hobby for someone who helped overthrow a 250-year-old shogunate. You sidle up to him, hands behind your back, casual as a goose at a gun range. Sensei, you ask, if Tokyo's gone mad, isn't it our duty to bring clarity? He doesn't answer at first, just stares at a cloud like he's trying to read subtitles from the gods. Finally, I fear we are no longer needed. The world has moved on. Yeah, okay, Gandalf, but what are we supposed to do with our swords? And here's where it gets weird. Saigo doesn't exactly call for rebellion. He doesn't draw battle plans on your chest. He doesn't scream down with Tokyo from the rooftops, but he does say things like, if the government is corrupt, perhaps a cleansing fire is inevitable. And honor is sometimes louder than victory. And your personal favorite. I really miss sweet potatoes. Historians still argue whether Saigo wanted to start the rebellion or was just too passive to stop it. One theory claims he was deliberately ambiguous, a sort of rebel Schrödinger, both revolutionary and resigned, depending on who opened the metaphorical box. Another theory says he got dragged into it by his students. The military academy he founded in Kagoshima was full of young, highly caffeinated samurai fanboys who saw every tax law as a call to arms. One of them, let's call him Shinsuke, is writing manifestos at night. You peek over his shoulder. Tokyo's tyranny must be erased by blade and blood. Bit much, don't you think? Shinsuke shrugs. Too subtle? And that's the thing. These kids aren't learning economics, they're learning war. The academy has drills, firearms practice, sword kata, tactical retreat exercises. It's Hogwarts, but with less magic and more exploding arsenals. Which, by the way, happens next week. See, Tokyo catches wind of the growing cult of Saigo. They send spies. The spies vanish. Then a supply ship shows up and gets harassed. Then the academy students blow up a government armory. Oops. You're there when the fireball hits the night sky. It's orange, bright, and smells like gunpowder and revolution. We're really doing this, huh, you mutter. Shinsuke grins like a raccoon that just found a cannon. It's time to bring back Bushido. You glance at Saigo, hoping he'll say, nope, absolutely not. But instead, he's just walking. Marching, actually, toward Kagoshima Castle. With you. With everyone? One weird trivia nugget before we go. Full insurrection, Saigo Takamori was so revered that even in rebellion, people still called him the last true samurai, and schools across the country kept portraits of him up after he revolted against the government. That's like hanging a photo of Benedict Arnold in your civics class and liking it. You march behind him with your makeshift army of grumbling has-beens and sword-happy teenagers. Someone's playing a flute. Someone else is polishing a cannonball with a rice rag. Morale is weirdly high. Then you hear it. Clink, clink, clink. Metal boots. You look up. Imperial troops, uniforms, modern rifles. You blink. Did they always look that shiny? Saigo turns to the crowd. I do not desire war, he says, but if war comes to my doorstep, I will greet it with open arms and a closed fist. Applause. Someone throws a headband into the air. You sigh, we're so screwed. But at least you're screwed together with dogs and honor and a general who speaks in riddles and owns 37 swords. The rebellion is on. Samurai Hogwarts goes rogue. By now, your life feels like a fever dream written by a drunk historian and directed by a kabuki actor on a budget. You've got a war coming, a melancholy general who talks like a haiku in human form, and a school full of teenage sword addicts who think Napoleon was too chill. Welcome to the Shigako Saigo Takamori's elite military academy, a place that started with noble intentions and somehow turned into a paramilitary theme park with extra homework and light terrorism. You remember your first day, the smell of ink, steel, and teenage angst. Uniforms starched so hard they could deflect arrows, dojos echoing with the clack of wooden swords, and the occasional "oh my ear" as someone misjudged a head strike. You thought this would be a disciplined place of honor. You were half right. The other half is chaos with kanji. Let's be clear, this place was supposed to be the forge for a new Japan, a place where samurai values met modern tactics, Bushido 2.0. But when the Meiji government decided that teaching samurai how to shoot was maybe not ideal for national stability, they cut funding. Saigo just nodded, smiled, and kept training them anyway. You sneak into the courtyard before dawn. There's Shinsuke again, doing kata with 2 swords, shirtless, quoting Sun Tzu like a guy who just discovered motivational posters. If you know the enemy and know yourself, he pants. Mid-lunge, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. You nod. Cool. You also need sleep. He hasn't slept in 3 days? Says dreams are for people without revolutions. Fun historical fact. By 1877, the Shigako had around 2,000 students being drilled in firearms, artillery, and classic swordsmanship. The ratio of teenage fervor to adult supervision was disturbingly high. And the curriculum, well, it included military history, musket drills, sword kata, reasons why Tokyo must burn, probably an unofficial seminar, field rations, how to make dried squid last through a siege, You remember your instructor, a beady-eyed old Ronin who taught battlefield etiquette with the tone of a disappointed uncle. If you must die, he once said, die cleanly. Don't scream. It's undignified. And don't trip. That's just embarrassing. He was also missing 2 toes and insisted on drinking vinegar before combat to tighten the blood. You're still not sure what that means. One weird trivia nugget. Some students at the academy were taught to fight with both traditional weapons and imported guns, but Saigo himself refused to use firearms, believing they corrupted the warrior spirit. So yes, you're training for modern war under a man who wants to do it medieval style. And now the academy has gone rogue. After the armory explosion, it's open rebellion. No more pretending this is just a school. You've got cannons on the lawn. You've got scouts. You've got war drums. Someone painted a banner that reads glory or death or both. Saigo doesn't even flinch. Instead, he delivers a speech in the main hall. His voice is low, even, barely above the hum of adrenaline buzzing in your chest. If our voices cannot reach the capital, he says, then let our feet march there instead. You cheer because it feels right, but also because everyone else is cheering, and you don't want to be the one guy who gets left behind to mop up the blood. A courier bursts in. Government troops are moving. He shouts, they're mobilizing across Kyushu. Saigo nods. Then we must move faster. And just like that, Hogwarts becomes Helm's Deep. You pack your gear, sword, bento box, spare socks, rice paper will. You pause when you find your old ink brush. Might come in handy for dramatic battlefield quotes. The boys are fired up. Shinsuke draws a map on the wall with a charcoal stick and lots of arrows pointing to Kumamoto. That's our first target, he says. It's a modern fortress, big walls, army garrison, totally suicidal. You raise a hand. So, why are we doing it? Because, he grins, it's glorious. You're starting to miss the days when your biggest worry was losing your rice stipend. Historians still debate whether this military academy was ever meant to become a full-blown insurgency HQ. Some argue it was always Saigo's shadow army. Others say it was meant for regional defense, and the rebellion spiraled out of student fanaticism and bad central planning. Either way, it's spiraling now. You catch a moment alone with Saigo. Do you really think we'll win, you ask? He looks tired, not weak, just ancient, like his bones remember every failed empire. No, he says, but we might remind them who we were. Great, you're following a war you can't win, led by a man who feeds strays and speaks in epitaphs. But here's the thing, it's yours. This is your last shot at meaning, at legacy, at yelling bonsai without irony. So you tighten your armor, tie your headband, step onto the parade ground beside your classmates. The sky's overcast. Someone starts chanting a song about cherry blossoms and death. You look around at your fellow Hogwarts dropouts and whisper, let's go break history. Rice taxes and mustache tyrants. Marching north, your boots slosh through mud and revolution. You squint at the horizon, half expecting Kumamoto Castle to rise out of the earth like a boss level. But before you get there, let's talk about the real villain of this rebellion tax reform. Yes, dear listener, this entire samurai civil war swords, cannons, flaming bureaucracy hinges on rice and who gets to steal it. You remember the old system landowning samurai, like your uncle with the bad knee, and 12 children used to collect taxes in rice. Literal bags of the stuff. You'd weigh it, bite it for quality, store it in barns guarded by guys who probably couldn't read but had amazing knife skills. Then Meiji happened. Now taxes are paid in money, actual yen, currency printed by Tokyo bureaucrats who wear glasses and pronounce honor with an asterisk. Your rice barns are empty. Your stomach is confused. Your sword hasn't been sharpened since autumn. Here's your historical fact. The 1873 land tax reform replaced the rice-based system with a fixed monetary tax paid in cash. Farmers hated it. Samurai hated it. Accountants were thrilled. Worse, the government still collects the same amount of tax even if your crops fail. One bad harvest and boom, you're selling your sword for soup. Meanwhile, Tokyo's aristocrats are posing for oil paintings in top hats, sipping imported brandy, and debating whether mustache wax should be included in the national budget. You're in a village now, dirt roads, hollow eyes. The people cheer as your ragtag army marches by. Why? Because they hate the taxmen more than they fear your swords. One elderly farmer throws you a radish. For Saigo-sama, he croaks, "You salute him with the radish." We march for all radish kind. Behind you, someone shouts, "We're out of miso again." Your logistics officer is a 17-year-old with dreams of dying dramatically. He forgot to pack enough supplies. Again. So, you're running a rebellion on sweet potatoes, dried fish, and caffeine-fueled nationalism. Trivia time. During the Satsuma Rebellion, many samurai raided government rice storehouses to feed their armies. That's right, guys. Trained in poetry and decapitation, turned into full-time grocery bandits. Meanwhile, the Meiji government is freaking out in Tokyo. They've got a map of Kyushu covered in red pins. Someone's sweating into a ledger. They've dispatched General Yamagata, one of those men who looks like he was born shouting. He wears a Prussian uniform, twirls a baton like it owes him money, and commands conscripted soldiers who actually get paid. Yamagata says, "We're not fighting samurai, we're fighting nostalgia." Okay, rude, but fair. Historians still argue whether this rebellion was about honor, economics, or just a last hurrah for a dying class. The answer, of course, is yes. And then there's the conscription issue. See? Meiji introduced universal conscription in 1873. That meant commoners, you know. Peasants, carpenters, that guy who sells eel on a stick could now be drafted into the army, wearing boots, holding guns, calling themselves soldiers. To you, this is sacrilege. You trained for years to perfect your draw cut. You memorized your ancestors' death poems. And now some 19-year-old from Yokohama with a crooked mustache can shoot you from 300 meters while eating a sandwich. Your friend Koji spits in the dirt. They dishonor the battlefield with their shoes. You nod solemnly. Real warriors wear sandals and crippling expectations. But the Meiji army, they don't care. They've got rifles, Gatling guns, foreign trainers, supply lines, logistics. You've got pride and a really sharp radish. Still, the morale in your camp is strangely high. Maybe it's because you believe in Saigo. Maybe it's because rebellion means something. Even if you can't define it without using the words honor and vengeance in the same sentence. Or maybe it's because none of you have read a newspaper in 6 months and think Tokyo's about to collapse under the sheer weight of its own paperwork. Night falls. You sit around the fire, sharpening your blade and arguing about whether loyalty or righteousness should come first in your personal death poem. Shinsuke says loyalty. You say righteousness. Koji says, "Can we just eat already?" The army's getting close to Kumamoto. You hear rumors that the castle has well-defended modern walls, cannons, actual food. Your quartermaster grumbles. All I've got left is pickled plum and vengeance. You offer him the radish. From a farmer, you say, for the cause. He eats it like a man chewing justice. The march continues. You pass burned villages scorched by the local police to prevent you from looting them. You see peasants watching from the hills, unsure whether to cheer or hide. You see telegraph poles, those strange wooden towers that let Tokyo whisper into distant ears. You hate them. Can I fight a telegraph pole? Koji asks. If it insults your honor, you reply. He stares at one. I think it just did. You keep walking. And walking. You start to wonder when all the rice is gone, when the samurai are ghosts, when the Meiji men put railroads everywhere and schools teach French instead of Confucian values. What will be left of you? But you shake it off, because tomorrow you reach Kumamoto and you're bringing swords to a gunfight. Again? Rebellion, hold my sake. You reach Kumamoto like a fever-breaking, mud-caked, half-starved, and smelling like a barn full of old regrets, but still marching, 12,000 strong, give or take the ones who wandered off or died of dramatic monologues. The city rises before you, Kumamoto Castle, stone-faced and smug. It's not just a fortress, it's a monument to everything you hate: modern military strategy, Western fortification design, and efficient use of concrete. You squint up at the walls like they insulted your ancestors. Koji pokes it with a stick. Doesn't look very swordable. He's right. The place is a nightmare for traditional attackers. It has gun loops, sloped walls, and over 3,000 Imperial soldiers already inside, polishing their rifles and judging your armor. But Saigo stares at it like it's a math problem he will solve with pure emotion. He says nothing, just points, and the cannons begin. Let's drop the historical anchor. The Satsuma army laid siege to Kumamoto Castle on February 19th, 1877. It was the first major clash of the rebellion, and it did not go according to plan. Your plan, to be specific, involved marching up to the walls with honor, asking politely for the defenders to surrender, being welcomed as heroes of a noble cause. Reality had other ideas. Here's what actually happens. You send a letter of negotiation. The castle commander, General Tani, reads it. He laughs so hard he nearly chokes on his tea and responds with rifle fire. Now the siege is on. You dig trenches in the rain. You build catapults out of questionable bamboo and pure desperation. You try to storm the walls once, just once, and get turned into human confetti by Gatling guns. One guy loses his top knot and his pride in the same volley. This is not how I imagined glory, someone whispers, clutching a broken spear. Shinsuke writes haikus in the dirt. Walls so tall and cold. My blade cannot cut through stone. I miss my blanket. Meanwhile, Saigo is pacing like a caged tiger in a philosophy department. He won't use modern tactics, won't authorize full assaults. He wants a siege of dignity, honor, and minimal bloodshed. You want food? Because here's the trivia nugget of the day. The Satsuma army brought very little in terms of long-term supplies. They expected quick victories and local support. Instead, they got Imperial gunfire and a diet of damp rice and crushed hope. After a week, morale dips like a bad stock market. Rain turns the camps into soup. Horses start looking edible. A guy named Minoru starts talking to a rock he's named General Tofu. But the worst part, nothing's happening. You're stuck. Siege warfare, you learn, is 10% violence and 90% deeply uncomfortable waiting. You expected duels at dawn, dramatic last stands, something with violins. Instead, you get trench rot and snipers. Historians still argue whether Saigo's decision to besiege rather than storm the castle was tactical wisdom or emotional hesitation. Some say he hoped to win by reputation alone. Others think he was buying time. A few whisper that he just couldn't stomach the thought of fighting fellow Japanese. Meanwhile, the defenders are thriving. They've got rations, rifles, and a telegraph line. Yes, that's right, they're literally texting Tokyo PLS send help, surrounded by samurai, vibes tense. And Tokyo answers, ships unload fresh troops along the coast. The Imperial Army is coming, faster than expected, with modern training and pants that match. You're about to be the filling in a steel and samurai sandwich. You gather with the lads around a fire made from broken crates and hope. Maybe we can tunnel under the castle, Koji says, chewing on a raw turnip. You can barely tie your armor, you reply. Shinsuke stares at the walls, eyes full of poetry and murder. If we die here, he murmurs, let it be loud. You nod, or at least brief. You sleep that night with one hand on your sword and the other clutching a rock you've named Plan B. The cannon fire starts at dawn. This time, from the outside, you hear it echo from the hills, Imperial artillery announcing its arrival like an uninvited guest kicking the door in. You rush to the ridge and see it government troops in formation, bayonets glinting, flags waving, bugles bugling. Koji gulps. How many of them are there? Too many. And how many of us are functional? You look back at your camp. Half the men are sick. A third are missing shoes. Someone is trying to boil bark for breakfast. Let's say plucky. Saigo gathers the officers. His face is stone, calm, tired. We hold, he says, we do not retreat. We remember who we are. Someone asks, and if they surround us? He smiles sadly. Of course. Then they won't have to look far for a fight. You wish, in that moment, for a little less poetry and a lot more Gatling guns. The siege continues, but now you are the one being encircled. March of the Mutton Chop Misfits. It's official you're retreating. But don't worry, it's a tactical withdrawal, or a sideways advance, or, depending on how hard you spin it at the after-party, a maneuver of honorable redirection. Kumamoto Castle won't fall, not to swords, not to slogans, definitely not to yelling bonsai at reinforced stone from 80 meters away. And now, Imperial reinforcements are arriving daily fresh boots, newer guns, and uniforms so crisp they make your sweat-stained robe look like a defeated curtain. So Saigo gives the order we leave, not defeated, not disgraced, just redistributed. You pack your belongings, which include a sword that's been through 5 arguments and 1 accidental cooking fire, 2 rice balls, 1 pair of socks currently being shared with a goat, and your pride, tucked deep in your sleeve where no one can see how wrinkled it is. Now begins the grand shuffle north, the march of the Mutton Chop Misfits, as future historians will absolutely not call it, but you will. Let's be clear, you are not the organized army you were in the opening weeks. This is more performance art than military precision. You've got samurai veterans with arthritis, teenage idealists still quoting Confucius, and one guy who insists on marching barefoot to feel the land's sorrow. One historical fact for context: after the failed siege of Kumamoto, the Satsuma army retreated north toward Tabaruzaka, pursued relentlessly by imperial forces. It was muddy, chaotic, and involved more arguing than actual movement. Your formations are fluid. Is this the left flank, someone asks? You look around, mostly farmers, 1 stray dog, and a drummer who thinks the war is a music festival. Sure, you say, why not? Koji shows up with a map drawn on a piece of grilled eel skin. According to this, we're already dead. You pat him on the back. At least we're on schedule. The roads are terrible. Spring rain turns everything to slush. You lose 3 carts to mud and 1 to emotional fatigue. The local villagers watch your soggy army limp past and whisper things like, "Bless their hearts, and should we hide the chickens?" You rest in abandoned temples, old schoolhouses, half-collapsed barns. Each night is colder, wetter, and slightly more absurd. One evening, a wild boar charges your camp. You try to fight it with a spear. It wins. Shinsuke writes a haiku about the experience. Noble beast of rage. Dindage. I stabbed it. It bit my leg. We are both in pain. Still, morale isn't completely dead, mostly just hungover. Because here's the thing, this whole rebellion still feels noble. You've convinced yourselves that history will remember this as a last stand of dignity, a final samurai hurrah. The dying roar of tradition before Tokyo paves the entire country in railroads and government paperwork. And that leads us to the weird trivia nugget of the day. Several Satsuma rebels marched with full ceremonial armor and family heirloom weapons, despite knowing that gunfire didn't care about ancestral blessings. Some even wore ancient kabuto helmets into battle, because if you're going down, you may as well look like a museum exhibit. Then comes Tabarazaka. You arrive just in time to realize you've been outflanked again. The Imperial Army has the high ground, the artillery, and the nerve to use rifled muskets. You've got Koji's eel map and a katana your grandfather used to open coconuts. Rain lashes your face, mud climbs up your calves, and the hillside turns into a soup of blood, fog, and miscommunication. Should we charge? You hear that a lot during the battle, mostly from guys who don't understand bullets. And yet you do it anyway. You always do. You and your squad scramble up the hill, slipping, sliding, roaring. You think maybe, this time honor will deflect bullets. It doesn't. Shinsuke gets winged in the arm and yells, "That was rude," before stabbing someone through a tree. Historians still argue whether Tabaruzaka was the turning point of the war, or just a really muddy disaster that sped up the inevitable. But everyone agrees it was a bloodbath. Nearly 10,000 combined casualties, all for a patch of hill that smelled like damp socks and failure. You fall back, again. You try to regroup, but the rain is biblical. Cannons misfire, men collapse from exhaustion, horses refuse to cooperate. One of them, your favorite, Chestnut, just walks into a pond and refuses to come out. You understand? Saigo remains calm, always calm. Even when the retreat becomes a full-on scramble, he simply tightens his belt, adjusts his robes, and says things like, "We bend, but we do not break." Someone asks, "What if we snap?" Then we snap with dignity. Okay, then. Eventually, your army splinters. Some head east, some west, some just lie down. You keep moving because movement feels like meaning, because the mud might wash off, but shame clings. You make camp in a forest that used to be a battlefield in the old days. You can feel the ghosts, or maybe it's just Koji muttering in his sleep. You sit beside the fire, stare at your blade, and whisper, still sharp, but you're not sure if you mean the sword or yourself. Kumamoto Castle brick wall, meet katana. Okay, so technically you've already left Kumamoto, retreated, fallen back, turned around bravely, whatever, but it haunts you. That stubborn fortress still looms in your dreams, square-jawed, stone-faced, and entirely unimpressed by your 12,000-man enthusiasm project. Let's rewind just a little, not because the plot needs it, but because you need closure. The first time you saw Kumamoto Castle, you assumed it would be like any other military encounter, shout a few slogans, swing your sword, and maybe someone would surrender dramatically. Instead, you got cannonballs, machine gun fire, and a stone wall that looked at you like a condescending uncle. Here's your history dose. Kumamoto Castle was one of the most formidable fortresses in Japan at the time. Upgraded with modern defenses, stocked with provisions, and commanded by General Tani Tateki, a man famous for his please shoot them first, ask questions later policy. It had been built centuries ago by men who clearly hated invaders and loved right angles, and the Meiji had improved it with, modern war stuff, like rifle loopholes, artillery bunkers, and enough food to wait you out for months. You brought the passion, and katanas, and one cart of fireworks someone swore could be weaponized. "Let's just scale the wall," Koji said on day one. You still don't know if he was joking. You tried, though, oh boy, did you try. Charge after charge, night attacks, diversions. A guy named Shinobu tried to tunnel under the walls using a spoon in pure rage. It didn't work. Saigo eventually set up siege lines, trenches, earthworks, forward camps. The whole thing started looking suspiciously like a Western war. That made you uncomfortable. And so did the part where you learned Kumamoto Castle had telegraph lines, letting them call Tokyo for reinforcements while you were over here trying to use messenger pigeons that kept flying back to Kagoshima for snacks. Trivia break. One rebel unit reportedly attempted to disguise themselves as friendly forces by wearing captured uniforms, but were spotted immediately due to their insistence on carrying swords and glaring at everyone. Subtlety was not your strong suit. But the real pain of Kumamoto wasn't the gunfire. It was the waiting. You trained for glorious death on horseback, not this soggy game of who blinks first every day. You dug trenches every night. You patched your boots with moss. One guy tried to cook a helmet. You invented 3 new words for mud. Shinsuke Still Bleeding Poetry wrote, Castle of Silence. My sword thirsts for warm triumph. Rain drinks it instead. Eventually, some rebels tried to set fire to the outer walls. Kumamoto's defenders replied with rifle volleys and what looked suspiciously like sarcasm. You tried storming a gate? It laughed at you. You threw rocks. It returned cannonballs. So you did what any proud warrior would do. In that situation, you sulked, retreated to the siege lines, sang old war songs with new sadness, ate pickled radish in silence, and then reinforcements for them. The Imperial Army arrived like clockwork with wagons, fresh boots, bugles, and the exact amount of disdain you'd expect from government regulars staring down a rebellion held together by string and stubbornness. Historians still argue whether Saigo truly believed he could take Kumamoto, or if the siege was a bluff meant to provoke broader uprisings. The truth probably lies somewhere between optimism and denial. He wouldn't storm the walls, wouldn't burn the town, couldn't go full monster. Because here's the thing, Saigo Takamori didn't hate the defenders. Some of them had even served under him during the Boshin War. He used to command men like General Tani. This whole war felt like fighting your reflection in a cracked mirror. Every time a cannon fired, you imagined it saying, "Why are you doing this to yourself?" Eventually, food ran low. You ate boiled leaves, then boiled boots, then nothing. Your friend Kenji died of dysentery while trying to write a defiant speech with a piece of charcoal. The last thing he scrawled, "Send more radishes." You buried him behind a broken torii gate and promised to avenge his stomach. Saigo finally gave the order to pull back, but he did it in the most poetic way imaginable. Standing in the drizzle, hands folded in his sleeves, he looked toward the castle and said, "The mountain does not yield, so the river must flow." Which, loosely translated, means, let's get the hell out of here. So you left. Quietly, sullenly, trying to make it look like a tactical choice instead of what it really was, getting your historical teeth kicked in by a brick wall. You looked back once. The castle didn't wave, didn't taunt. It just sat there, unbothered, unshaken. And you hated it just a little bit more for that. Guns, beans, and boredom. You are now officially in your let's just wander until something explodes phase of rebellion. You've retreated from Kumamoto Castle. You're low on food, morale, bullets, socks, and most forms of coherent military strategy. What you do have is a surplus of mood swings and bayonets. You march through the Kyushu countryside, soggy and confused, trying to convince yourself that being lost is tactical dispersion. You pass rice fields, scared villagers, and several oxen who give you the same look Tokyo's bureaucrats probably do seriously. You guys again. Koji's limping. Shinsuke's got trench mouth. One of the younger guys, probably named Tadashi, is trying to eat a pine cone. "We used to be an army," you mutter. No, Koji replies. We used to pretend to be one. Let's talk logistics. Here's your historical fact. The Satsuma Rebellion was starved of resources within weeks. The government cut off supply lines. Local support dried up. Weapons ran low. Ammunition became so scarce that some samurai resorted to reusing bullets. Yes, they literally dug them out of the dirt to fire again. Recycling, it's not just for the environment. It's for desperate civil wars, too. You're living off field scraps now. Beans, pickled weeds, crushed biscuits from the bottom of someone's travel pouch that may or may not be from 1872. You once dreamed of glorious death. Instead, you're arguing over who gets the last spoonful of boiled fern. And the boredom, oh God, the boredom. You spend entire afternoons crouched in a ditch, whispering about death like it's a gossip topic. You watch clouds, count cannonballs, rehearse your death monologue for a crowd that doesn't exist. One guy, Masaru, spends hours carving a wooden grenade out of a log. It doesn't work, but it looks explosive. You begin to notice strange behavior in the camp. Shinsuke is writing love letters to his own sword. Koji has developed a passionate hatred of bean soup. Someone has organized a duel club for no reason other than honor maintenance. And still, the Imperial troops pursue. They don't chase you fast, but they don't stop either. Their rifles are cleaner, their boots are newer. They march like they've read a manual. You march like you're in a failed music video. You hear rumors from peasants. The Emperor's army has Gatling guns. They've got foreign ships docking nearby. They even have maps. Maps. You weep quietly. Trivia break. Saigo's army didn't just lack bullets, they lacked uniformity. Some rebels wore old armor. Some had guns. Some wore headbands that read certain victory while looking like they were losing to a tree root. The army is a mess, and Saigo knows it. But he doesn't scold, he doesn't punish, he leads. With silence, with presence, with those poetic one-liners that make everyone think he's got a plan. Spoiler, he might not. At a hilltop camp, he addresses the troops. You all gather around, holding rusted blades and dented helmets like middle schoolers in detention. He says, "We are not defeated, only detoured." Shinsuke whispers, "Pretty sure I have dysentery." Koji mutters, "I'm detoured from my will to live." Still, you listen, because Saigo radiates a kind of fatal calm, like he's already accepted your collective death and just wants to make it look good. You begin harassing small Imperial garrisons, quick strikes, hit and run, snipe a supply wagon here, steal some rice there. It's not war. It's mildly aggressive haunting. The Imperial army doesn't even flinch. They advance, slowly, methodically, with enough logistics to make your bean-crusted map look like a crayon drawing. Then one day, you get lucky. A shipment of bullets, captured from a careless government convoy. The cheer in camp sounds like a football team that finally scored after 10 games of losing on purpose. You each get 5. 5 bullets? You stare at yours like they're lottery tickets made of lead. What should I name them, Koji asks, gently cradling his rounds. Hope, honor, regret, surprise, and Gary, you say. He nods. Gary will not miss. You spend the night cleaning your gun for the first time in weeks. It almost feels like normalcy, like this rebellion still has teeth. But the problem isn't your weapons. It's the math. You're down to less than 3,000 rebels. Many have deserted. Others just vanished. Maybe they're in the hills. Maybe they're ghosts. You're too tired to check. Historians still argue whether Saigo believed he could still win at this point, or if he simply refused to surrender because pride doesn't allow U-turns. Some say he hoped for a political compromise. Others believe he wanted a death worthy of legend. Either way, he's dragging you along the razor's edge of hopelessness. The Imperial army closes in. You keep moving, north, then west, then anywhere that isn't here. One night, during watch duty, you see an old samurai kneeling by the river, whispering into the water. What are you doing, you ask? He looks up, eyes tired but burning. Apologizing. For what? For what we became. The next morning, he's gone. Spoiler alert, the Navy exists now. You wake up to cannon fire. Not from a hillside, not from a trench, not from one of your buddies drunkenly detonating a powder keg for morale. No, this one comes from the ocean. You sit up, bleary-eyed, and squint toward the coast. There are dark shapes on the horizon. Ships, Imperial warships, dozens of them. You blink again. Since when do they have boats, Koji wheezes, still tangled in his rice straw blanket? Since always, you whisper, we just hope they forgot. They didn't. Here's your historical fact. By 1877, the Imperial Japanese Navy had steam-powered warships armed with artillery, capable of landing troops and supplies along any coastline. You, meanwhile, have one dinghy that's also used for laundry. This is the part where you realize that rebelling on an island was maybe not your best strategic move. Japan is 99% coastline, and the Meiji government has fully figured that out. Now they're flanking you by water, which feels deeply unfair and also mildly passive-aggressive. You try not to panic, but panic is trending. Shinsuke, ever the optimist, says maybe they're just stopping for lunch. Then the shells hit. Boom! A rice storehouse vaporizes. Boom! A temple roof flies off like it's in a kabuki remake of Twister. Boom! A cannonball lands right in the middle of your latrine. Koji stares at the smoking crater. Well, he mutters, there go our sanitation efforts. The camp scatters like startled deer in bathrobes. You try to rally your squad, but realize half of them are already gone, fled into the woods, dropped their swords, taken up farming again. Honestly, good for them. Saigo, of course, doesn't flinch. He stands on a ridge, arms folded, watching the coastline burn like it's a summer festival. He turns to you and says, they've remembered they have boats. You blink. We're surrounded. Sir, land, sea, there's no escape. He nods. Escape was never the goal. Great. Time for another haiku from Shinsuke. Sea spits fire at land. My sword is not waterproof. Send floaties and rum. Trivia nugget of the day, the Imperial Navy's involvement was the death knell for the rebellion, with ships delivering troops, weapons, and importantly, information along the coast. You couldn't outmarch the war anymore. It was already there, waiting, freshly shaved, and carrying detailed topographical maps. Your side, by contrast, is playing a kind of guerrilla hide-and-seek. Saigo moves inland, deeper into the hills, deeper into the mist. The rebels fracture further. You've gone from 12,000 to maybe 2,000 now, depending on who's hallucinating from hunger. You're barely an army. You're a concept, and yet you keep going. Because surrender still tastes worse than bark stew. Because Saigo still walks like the war matters. Because you've burned too many bridges and one actual bridge to go home now. Historians still debate whether the naval intervention was excessive or just good policy. Some call it necessary modernization. Others call it a steam-powered flex. What no one calls it is fair. You spend the next week dodging artillery and eating wild onions. Your socks disintegrate. Your sword gets chipped when you use it to open a can of fermented beans. One evening, you overhear a conversation between two young recruits. If we make it out, one says, I'm moving to Hokkaido and becoming a fisherman. The other nods, I'll open a noodle shop. Call it Last Stand Ramen. You smile, then cough, because the air is thick with gunpowder and irony. More Imperial ships arrive blockading Satsuma's coast. Kagoshima is unreachable. The government has choked you off. No reinforcements, no messages, no hope. Your march becomes a crawl, then a limp, then a shuffle of determined ghosts. You abandon the flatlands entirely and move into the mountains, crags, ravines, forests so thick they seem embarrassed to be involved. One morning, Koji walks into camp dragging a bundle of twigs and muttering, "I found a squirrel that looked at me funny." You've all become very twitchy. In a rare moment of silence, Saigo gathers the remaining officers. He lays out a rough plan. One final stand, one last push. Shiroyama, a hill outside Kagoshima, elevated, defensible, symbolic. "It will be where the noise stops," he says, staring into the fire. You think he means death, but maybe he means peace. Maybe he means both. Another trivia gem despite the chaos. Saigo's discipline never cracked. He refused to surrender, refused to flee overseas, refused to abandon his men, even as his body broke down and his sword arm weakened. You try to sleep, you dream of boats, steam engines, officers with clean fingernails. And you're still in the mud, still clutching a blade meant for an older world. You whisper to yourself, "They have ships." Pause. "But we have Shinsuke." Shinsuke snores loudly, face down in a bush, one hand clutching his poetry journal and the other resting on a grenade that might be a rock. You sigh. Close enough. Tokyo's revenge, Imperial overtime pay. The sun rises over Kagoshima Bay, and the sky is unreasonably cheerful for a day of absolute doom. Birds chirp, the breeze carries the scent of damp pine and gun oil, and somewhere out there, an entire modern army is heading toward your location with paychecks, maps, and working digestive systems. Welcome to the endgame. You've made it to Shiroyama the hill where Saigo Takamori, the last samurai TM, decides to plant what's left of your rebellion like a very stubborn flag. Your forces, roughly 300 starving, wounded, underarmed souls. The enemy, over 30,000 Imperial troops, including fresh conscripts, artillery, and dudes who have seen war and still came back for more because they love dental care and following orders. Here's your historical fact. The Battle of Shiroyama took place on September 24, 1877, and marked the final clash of the Satsuma Rebellion. It was a tragic mismatch of 19th century modernity versus 17th century vibes. Think Call of Duty versus Ghost of Tsushima, but with real blood and much worse lighting. You dig trenches, you stack logs, you pray the cannons won't fire today. Spoiler, they will. Saigo walks among you, limping slightly, but still regal in that my spine is held together by honor and fermented root tea kind of way. He stops beside you. "You've done well," he says. You try to speak, but your stomach growls louder than your voice. He smiles. "You still have your spirit." "No, sir," you say, "I have gas and a death wish." From the ridge, you can see them. The Imperial Army, thousands of uniforms glinting in the dawn, lines of cannon crews, Gatling guns, a brass band, because apparently someone thinks this is a picnic with murder. One trivia nugget, before we're all cannon mulch, the Meiji army reportedly brought searchlights to Shiroyama to track rebel movements at night. Yes, they had electrical lighting. Meanwhile, your side's best innovation is sharpened bamboo and positive thinking. Koji stares into the distance. "Do you think they brought lunch?" "Yeah," you say, "and medals?" You try to rally the lads. The mood is grimly theatrical. Everyone knows this is it. Some mutter last words, others clean their blades. One guy is writing haiku on his stomach because he ran out of paper and wants to die artistically. Shinsuke walks past with an eye patch now. He didn't need it. Says it makes him feel more fatal. You believe him. Night falls, and the hill explodes. Cannon barrage! Over 600 shells launched in the first hour. Trees vanish. Rocks shatter. Your ears ring like a cursed gong. You crouch in a trench beside Koji, who's holding a broken umbrella for morale. I think they're mad. He says, they pay people to be mad. You reply, this is Tokyo's revenge, the final, overwhelming flex of a government that decided no more swords in public, and then backed it up with steel, steam, and spreadsheets. Historians still argue whether this response was necessary or pure bureaucratic vengeance. Was it about restoring order, proving modern Japan could win a war the old way, or was it just the military-industrial complex looking for a reason to test new toys? You don't care, because now they're charging. Wave after wave of conscripts pour uphill. You fire if you're lucky enough to have bullets. Otherwise, you stab, you swing, you scream. You catch a rifle butt to the shoulder, slice down a kid who looks about 15, then roll into a ditch where someone is already bleeding out and politely offers you his remaining matcha candy. It's sweet. You think about crying. But that would waste salt. One squad breaks through your left flank. Shinsuke runs to intercept, yelling, I was born for this, and immediately falls into a ditch. He gets back up, somehow, and actually wins a duel with a government sergeant. Then screams, I peaked. You love him. Koji, bleeding from 3 limbs, shouts, tell my mother she was right about the socks. The Imperial Army surrounds you from all sides. And still you fight, because surrender is not in Saigo's vocabulary, because some part of you still believes that if you just hold out a little longer, something will shift. History will blink. The Emperor will arrive in person. Say, wow, these guys are committed, and offer you all a job at the Ministry of Sword Maintenance. But he doesn't. He's miles away, in Tokyo, wearing silk and writing haikus about national unity. Another round of cannon fire rips through the hilltop. The trees are gone. The trenches are rubble. The rebels, what's left of you, gather around Saigo like moths around the last candle. He's been hit badly, thigh shredded by shrapnel, face pale but still composed. He sits beneath a pine, asks for his friend Beppu Shinsuke, and whispers something none of you can hear. Maybe it's an order. Maybe it's a farewell. Maybe it's just no more bean soup. Trivia time again to this day. No one knows exactly how Saigo died. Some claim he committed seppuku with Beppu's help. Others believe he died of wounds and the suicide story was invented to preserve his dignity. Either way, his head vanished buried secretly by loyalists, or maybe never found at all. You watch as Beppu kneels beside him, draws his blade, then silence. The sun rises, the gunfire fades. You lie in a trench beside Koji, whose breathing is shallow but stubborn. We lose, he asks. You nod. But damn, we look good doing it. Retreat, regret, repeat. There's losing, and then there's what you're doing now. You're not even retreating anymore. You're leaking across the countryside. A dribble of wounded honor and bad decision-making. After Shiroyama, there are no more hills to die on, just rice paddies and haunted forests where the trees whisper, should have stayed home. You and the other survivors trickle through valleys and burn-out villages, a mobile museum of everything that's gone wrong since February. Soggy bandages, blunted swords, memories that smell like ash. Koji's limping with 1 boot and half a spleen. Shinsuke is taken to humming war chants ironically. You personally smell like regret, mold, and a briefcase full of existential dread. I think we're immortal, Koji says one morning, staring at his bandaged leg. No one this dumb should still be alive. Maybe we're just hard to aim at. You offer. He nods solemnly, like ideas. Here's your historical fact. After the defeat at Shiroyama, scattered rebels either surrendered, committed seppuku, or tried to reach the hills to continue resistance. Most were either captured or gave up. The government did not send thank you cards. You've lost everything except your blisters. But that doesn't stop some of the guys from still trying to fight. You stumble into a camp of about 40 rebels near a river. They're sharpening swords and debating whether the emperor has been brainwashed. One of them's making homemade gunpowder using tree bark and wishful thinking. Their leader, a guy who looks like a disappointed thundercloud, turns to you and says, "Reinforcements." You shrug. "More like bad memories." Still, you stay. What else can you do? You're a samurai in a country that's declared samurai obsolete. You're a ghost with bills to pay. That night, someone sets up a duel ring in the mud. Not for vengeance, just to feel something. Shinsuke fights a guy over a stolen radish and then hugs him afterward. You sit by the fire, staring into the flames, remembering when you thought this rebellion would matter. Koji limps over, drops beside you, and says, "You ever think we were just history's filler episode?" You sigh, "We're the beach arc, but with more blood." Here's your weird trivia nugget. Some rebels, in a desperate attempt to remain culturally relevant, took to writing letters to newspapers after the rebellion. These included manifestos, poetry, and one impressively long complaint about the quality of government socks. The Meiji government, meanwhile, is busy making everything official. New laws, new taxes, new maps where your hometown is now a special administrative region with an appointed pencil enthusiast in charge. You try to read a confiscated newspaper, but realize you no longer speak the dialect of modern Japan. Every page says you lost, get a job. Historians still argue whether any rebels seriously believed they could regroup post-Shiroyama, or if it was just instinct. A few small groups roamed the hills for months, like samurai-themed mosquitoes, annoying, nostalgic, and ultimately ineffective. You consider quitting? You really do. But then a kid runs into camp one morning with a scroll. A real, actual scroll, tied with red string like you're in a play. You unroll it. It's from a surviving rebel cell somewhere north. They're calling for one last rally, a symbolic stand. You look up. Another hill, Koji groans. You nod. Another hill. He lies back down. Wake me when we get to hell. You march again, this time through fog so thick it feels like the sky is embarrassed to watch. Every village you pass is quieter, every road more empty. You see posters on trees declaring Saigo dead, the rebellion crushed, and you officially irrelevant. You tear one down, blow your nose on it. Carry on. You find the rebel cell, all 12 of them. They're starving. One has a wooden leg carved out of a broken chair. They cheer when you arrive because they think you're reinforcements. You don't correct them. That night, you all sit around the fire, sharing the last of your pickled radish and dignity. Someone plays a flute, badly. Shinsuke writes in his journal, "We wandered so far. Honor kept us company. It was a bad friend." You try to sleep. But your dreams are cluttered with cannon fire and Saigo's voice saying cryptic things like, "The cherry blossom falls because it must." When you wake, half the rebels are gone. No note. Just gone. You don't blame them. Koji sits beside you, watching the sunrise. "Should we surrender?" he asks. You think about it. Then nod. "Maybe, but not today." You stand. One last march, even if it's just into the dirt. Bloody final stand at Shiroyama. It's just before dawn. The hill is still. Your boots crunch the frost as you climb toward Shiroyama. Again, back where it ended, or began, or just stop pretending. There's no mistaking it this time. This is the last stand, the final act, the stupid, glorious, doomed conclusion. You're down to just over 300 men now, unless you count ghosts, in which case the number goes way, way up. Everyone looks like a walking poem tattered armor, cracked swords, bandages stained every shade of defeat. No food, no bullets, no plan, just a hill, a legend, and a man named Saigo Takamori who refuses to die lying down. Here's your hard historical fact. At 3:00 a.m. on September 24th, 1877, the Imperial Army launched a full-scale assault on Shiroyama with 30,000 men. You have roughly 300. That's not a battle. That's a slow-motion obituary. You take your position in the pine forest. The sky is the color of bruised steel. You grip your sword so hard your knuckles creak. You hear Koji beside you, muttering his will like a grocery list. Tell my wife I left the rice pot on, and that the sword in the attic is cursed. Shinsuke's sharpening his blade with the same look he had before his first kiss. Focused, confused, slightly aroused by doom.
And Saigo,
he's already dressed. He wears full uniform, sword polished, hair tied back, limping, yes, but upright, eyes quiet, like he's already written his name in the wind and now just wants to sign it in blood. He nods to you. You nod back. No words. They'd get crushed under the cannons. The bombardment starts. Fire rains from the mountains. Shells scream past your ears. Trees shatter. Earth kicks up like it's trying to leave the war early. A searchlight pins your trench. You duck. Since when do they have electricity, you hiss? Since we started losing, Koji replies, clutching his helmet like it's a loved one. You charge anyway. Because what else can you do? You spring from cover with a roar that sounds a lot braver than it feels. You swing your blade through brush, mud, and a government conscript with eyes wide as bowls. He doesn't deserve this. None of them do. But here you are. Trivia moment. Many of the government soldiers at Shiroyama were conscripts, drafted farmers barely trained, terrified of the samurai mythos. Some froze, some cried, some killed because it was easier than being killed. You don't blame them. Much. The first wave hits your flank. You and 10 others hold the line for about 17 seconds before it turns into a free-for-all. Blades clash, rifles crack, someone throws a rock and screams for Saigo. You duck just in time to see Shinsuke leap onto a Gatling gun nest using nothing but fury and a stick. He's yelling something incoherent, possibly a poem, possibly just vowels. Koji gets stabbed in the leg. Again. He laughs as he punches the guy back. This leg owes me nothing anymore. You want to stop him and say no one writes ballads about the second to last stand, but it's too late. The line collapses. Saigo's hit. Not once, twice. First in the stomach, then in the thigh. He falls hard. You see Beppu Shinsuke, a different Shinsuke. Japan has 2 names and no chill run to his side. And here comes the moment. The moment every historian fights about over tea and too much honor. Did Saigo commit seppuku? Did Beppu assist? Was he already dying? And it was symbolic. The official record says he died with honor. The unofficial one says he died in pain, whispering poetry and apology into the dirt. The truth, you don't know. You're too busy dragging Koji into the underbrush while bullets trace question marks in the air above your head. You turn back just once. Saigo's body lies crumpled beneath a cedar tree. Someone's already taken his head. Maybe Beppu, to protect his dignity. Maybe the government, to confirm his death. Maybe a dog who was really into history. Historians still argue over where his head went. Some say it was buried in secret, others that it was preserved, studied, or even swapped with a look-alike. One theory claims it was never found at all, and that Saigo lived, reborn as a wandering monk with suspicious sword skills. But not you. You're still here, still bleeding, still trying to figure out how this all unraveled so fast. One last push. One last scream. You charge downhill with the 5 remaining rebels in your squad, teeth bared, swords high. And then you stop because there's no one left to kill. Just rows of Imperial troops, watching, waiting, guns raised. You drop your sword, raise your hands, and for the first time in months, you say, I surrender. No one cheers. No one jeers. They just lower their rifles. Someone offers you water. You cry into it, and then drink, because honor is a beautiful thing. But hydration is life. The headless statue problem. You live, which is awkward, because the entire rebellion ended in a thunderous suicide pact of poetry and bayonets, and now here you are, not dead, dragging your bandaged body through the streets of Kagoshima, avoiding eye contact with school children who probably already learned about your failure in class. Your sword's gone. Your top knot's gone. Your relevance is also gone. Koji, who is somehow still alive and now walking with a cane made from a busted rifle, leans over and says, I thought dying in glory would feel more glorious. You nod. Turns out glory involves a lot more limping. You shuffle into obscurity like a defeated actor after a bad play. But Japan's just getting started. Let's get you some historical closure. The Satsuma Rebellion officially ended with Saigo's death on September 24th, 1877. The remaining rebels either surrendered, went home quietly, or were politely executed by a government that had run out of patience and tea. Saigo became a legend almost immediately. The man they once called a traitor, posthumously pardoned, not just forgiven, glorified. Statues, poems, textbooks, a movie or 5. The Meiji government realized something. Saigo's death was too clean, too poetic, too conveniently symbolic to waste. So they spun it, repackaged the man who literally tried to overthrow them as the true spirit of the samurai. You blink when you hear this. Wait, you say, didn't we try to burn Tokyo? Koji shrugs. I think we're heroes now, retroactively. In 1898, 2 decades after the rebellion, the government unveiled a towering bronze statue of Saigo Takamori in Ueno Park, Tokyo. He's depicted walking his dog, in casual clothes, sword sheathed, looking like he's on his way to buy miso. Which is wild, considering Tokyo once put a price on his head. But here's where the weird trivia nugget kicks in. The statue has no head. Okay, technically, it has a head, but it's a reconstructed head based on someone else's face, because nobody knows what really happened to Saigo's actual one. Did Beppu bury it secretly? Was it sent to Tokyo in a box? Did it vanish? Did it become part of a shrine? Did a rebellious goat eat it? Historians still argue over where Saigo's head went like it's the world's most dignified scavenger hunt. Conspiracy theorists, amateur archaeologists, and government officials have all had their guesses, but no one can say for sure. And that's the problem with headless martyrs. They get mythologized fast. Saigo becomes a symbol for all sorts of things he probably never intended. Samurai honor, loyalty to the emperor, nostalgia for a Japan that no longer exists. Dogs, for some reason. Your rebellion, meanwhile, gets the usual treatment. The textbooks reduce it to 3 paragraphs between land tax reform and first Japanese railways. They mention how brave you were, how tragic, how doomed. They don't mention the time Koji tried to duel a tree because it looked at him wrong, or the fermented bean soup that nearly wiped out your entire squad, or that you spent 3 days hiding in a ditch talking to a log you named General Riceface. You visit the Ueno statue one day, just to see it. Tourists take photos, kids climb the base, someone's selling ice cream nearby. You stare up at that bronze face, calm, noble, forged in silence. It doesn't blink, doesn't speak, Doesn't mention that the real Saigo was bleeding out under a pine tree while you tried to hold Koji's guts in with a handkerchief. He looks taller than I remember, Koji says. He was lying down the last time we saw him. You reply, you sit on a bench. Say nothing. A group of school kids walks past. One points at you. Mom, is that a real samurai? She chuckles. No, sweetie, they're all gone now. You wave weakly. She's not wrong. You're not a samurai anymore. Not in this new Japan. You're just a guy with an old scar and even older memories. The Meiji government has won. They've modernized everything. Schools, currency, haircuts, warfare, history. They've even cleaned up your rebellion and mounted it on the national shelf like a decorative vase labeled cultural heritage. And you rent a room above a tofu shop. You sweep the floor every morning. Sometimes you still wear your sword, but only when no one's watching. At night, you drink cheap sake and reread the old war poems. You pretend your name meant something. Sometimes it does. Koji visits once a month, brings pickles, complains about his knees. You play a game where you name things Saigo would have hated. Elevators. Koji says, you nod. Telegrams. Button shirts. Beer from cans. Foreign socks. You laugh, because that's all you can do now. There's no revolution left. Just memory. And the uncomfortable realization that maybe, just maybe, your failure helped build the very world that replaced you. A country you no longer recognize. You wake up to silence. Not the quiet of peace, but the weird hush of a country that's moved on without you. Like waking up from a long nap to find out your ex got married, invented the fax machine, and renamed your sword aggressively nostalgic kitchenware. You walk the streets of Kagoshima now, no longer feared, no longer followed, just observed, politely, like a museum exhibit that wandered off. The signs are everywhere. That old dojo, now a tax office. The shrine where you swore vengeance, converted into a rail station. The tree you bled under during that one skirmish, cut down to make room for a noodle cart. You can't even be mad. The noodles are excellent. Here's your closing historical fact. By 1889, Japan had adopted a full constitution and a modern parliamentary government. The emperor was now a symbolic figure. The samurai class was abolished. And the people were wearing Western suits like they'd been born in them. Your country, your Japan, was now Meiji Japan. You didn't win, but your death in Saigo's made it look noble. And the Meiji boys, they're smart. They didn't erase you. They absorbed you, declared your sacrifice meaningful, declared Saigo a tragic hero, declared your rebellion the dramatic closing credits to the samurai era. Congratulations, you're poetry now. You sit by the bay where the final gunboats once loomed. Now, ferries float there, carrying tourists, school kids. One walks past you and whispers, that old guy has a sword. The teacher shushes her. That's probably just an umbrella. It's not. But whatever. You remember when everything made sense, when swords solved problems, when enemies stood in front of you, not behind desks. Now problems come with policy memos and train schedules. Koji, bless his wobbly knees, shows up with a newspaper. Another statue going up, he says, you raise an eyebrow, another Saigo. He nods. This time, he's teaching a dog how to read. You both laugh. Not because it's funny, because it's easier than crying. Here's your weird trivia nugget. Some later, Meiji officials said privately that Saigo's rebellion, though tragic, gave the new Japan its first true test and solidified public respect for the emperor. So yes, you fought a government that now thanks you in footnotes. Historians still argue whether you were traitors, heroes, or glorified props in the theater of modernization. You know the truth. You were real people. Hungry, angry, confused, proud. You fought for something you believed in, even if it was doomed, especially because it was doomed. Now, you sip your tea. Watch the trains go by. Every now and then, someone nods at you half respectfully, half curiously. You nod back. One day, a young officer stops and asks, "Were you really there?" You answer, "No." Then, "Yes." Then you wave him off. Does it matter? He walks away, scribbling in a notebook like you just gave him homework. And maybe you did. Maybe he'll write your story. Maybe he'll get it wrong. But at least it'll be written. You pull your old sword from under the table, rusted now, useless, but still yours. You swing it once, slow and silent, like the wind itself is bowing. You whisper, "We were here." And the hill, the bay, the stone, the soil, they echo back. "We remember." It's over now. The cannons are quiet. The flags have fallen. The armor's been folded away, and the ashes of the old world drift into the soil like whispers from another dream. You made it. You survived a war that was never meant to be won, a rebellion fought with memory and pride, against a tide too wide to hold back, and now your sword rests, your boots come off, your shoulders can finally lower. No more marching, no more shouting, no more bonsai yelled into the fog just to feel heard. Breathe in, feel the stillness, the kind that doesn't demand anything from you. No honor to protect, no past to avenge, just now, just this. You're not forgotten. Even if the world doesn't say your name, it walks on the roads you carved. It speaks with the tongue you bled to defend. It builds its cities on the bones of your sacrifice, and maybe, once in a while, it looks back and bows.
Not out of pity.
Out of thanks. Let that be enough. So rest now. Really rest. Let the stars be your lanterns, the wind your lullaby, and the soft hush of history folding close the final chapter. Tomorrow will come. But tonight is for peace. You've earned it. Sleep well, warrior. Sleep deeply. Sleep long,